This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always with me. Aboriginal land. Always
Tansei, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Stonechild, and I'm very excited and honored to have Mumilaaq Qaqqaq here with me today. For those of you who don't know, Mumilaaq was born in Baker Lake, Northwest Territories, and she is one of the youngest members to be sworn into the House of Commons to represent Nunavut for the new Democratic Party. She is a Canadian activist and a politician, and I actually met Mumilaaq over 10 years ago in Ottawa. We're a part of this youth group called Activate, and we're given little challenges. And at one point, I believe we're even running across Parliament Hill. And so it's funny that over 10 years later, we've come full circle, reconnecting in the very same territory, Parliament Hill, seeking and demanding justice from the federal institution. And this is all very important to Mumilaaq's work. And so we talk a bit about her journey, how she got to where she is today, and what's on the horizon for 2021. So without further ado, Mumilaaq. I know we have all been waiting for this episode, for this conversation with Mumilaaq for the past couple weeks, and so I'm finally excited to introduce you to Mumilaaq. Thank you so much, hi, for being here. If you just want to introduce yourself, where you're from, thank you.
Thank you, Shayla, for having me on here, and good to finally be here. I know we've had this in the works for a little while. So my name is Mumilaaq Qaqqaq. I'm a 27-year-old Inuk woman, originally from Baker Lake, Nunavut, and I represent Nunavut as the Member of Parliament for the territory. Still based out of Baker Lake. Recently, and also, of course, in Ottawa, a good chunk of the time as a member of Parliament. And super excited to be here and have our discussion today.
And so my first question for you is, how are you doing? I mean, I know June for me has been overwhelming. Right now in Canada, we are facing the uncovering of mass and unmarked graves, and it was also Indigenous History Month. And I know you also gave that speech that you're leaving the House of Commons. And so how have you been doing the past month?
Yeah, I think it's been a really heavy time for a lot of Indigenous people across the country when we're talking about the uncovering of these graves. We're not talking about a discovery, but confirmation, and I'm not sure the right word yet to use, but it's a realization that what we've known all along is true, and it's here right in front of us. So I think that heavy feeling has been something consistent throughout Canada, and people also, I think, need to realize that this is a history that often as Indigenous people, we're not even taught ourselves. And when we are, we're forced to then cope with that information in an unbalanced world where our communities still really, really struggle. So that speech as well, that farewell speech, was a forced speech. I'm not sure how else to put it. So the federal institution decided this was going to be the slot for the farewell speeches, clearly signaling or waving to an election. And I didn't want to give up that opportunity, a full 10 minutes on House of Commons record, to be able to talk about my experience. I wish it wasn't slotted for that time. I would have loved to have been doing that speech in 2 years, but that was what the Liberals put in front of me, and I didn't want to let that opportunity go. So that's been really interesting and stressful. The media has handled it extremely poorly, saying that I'm stepping down, that I've resigned, which is absolutely untrue, and has made my job incredibly difficult because people think I'm no longer working as a member of Parliament, and I am.
Yeah, I think I was even under the impression that you were like leaving a parliament, and I was like, what? Like, I literally did not see it coming. And so I definitely was caught off guard just by the way the media handled it. But also, I feel like it was very eye opening for Canadians and even for myself to realize that even when you are in a position of power, that your voice maybe is not being valued or heard or being acted upon the way you want it to be. And so I'm curious to know, like, how has that experience been for you being an Inuk person in the House of Commons, which is like a colonial entity that has done so much harm to our communities? How has that experience been for you?
I think that's a great question, and one that doesn't come up, I think, as often as it should. And it took me a long time to realize that in this position, I don't want to use the word fortunate, but I feel I should. I'm fortunate to feel comfortable and safe in my party enough to voice whatever I need to. I have never felt the need to not say anything, or that I was speaking out of turn or anything. Like, I have never felt that way within my party. I've had extremely honest conversations with Jagmeet that I know could never happen with someone like Trudeau or O'Toole, and I know those things to be true. But when I walk into the House of Commons, I have 23 other colleagues that support those kinds of views and ideations and values and beliefs that people should truly be equal, or treated or given the opportunity to have equity. And when I walk into House of Commons, though, I'm walking into dozens, if not hundreds, of ideations that willingly think it's okay to take a knee instead of changing laws that can save lives, that think it's fine to, so that farewell speech happened. Everybody thinks I'm stepping down or resigning. I'm not, because not barely 2 days later, I was on PROC committee trying to get Bill C-19 amended to include Indigenous languages on the ballot. What that committee said was that it was out of scope, which the committee can determine themselves it is in scope. They can say, yes, we're going to talk about this. And they chose themselves to say, no, we're not. These are the lawmakers, the law changers. These are people, like said, have power. And to be in a position that's viewed as powerful, to have that ability to say what needs to be said, but not be taken seriously to the point where it's killing Inuit, that I'm willingly walking into those kinds of ideations, interacting with them all the time. They're all gathered in a group in front of me, in front of the nation, and they come together and work together to keep oppressive systems in place for Indigenous people. So it took me a long time, to a good, I'd say, 14 months or so, to really understand what I was walking into when I was walking into that.
Yeah, I think we like hope for the best, because when you look at the government, it should be for the people. But what I'm seeing is that it's really for a select few with the power. And so in your whole experience being an MP, have things been changing, or do you find things are getting worse within Parliament? Like, do we have things to hope for? Have you seen any progress within your term?
That's an interesting question. I think we can look at Jody Wilson-Raybould's experience, and she's recently announced that she's not going to be running again. And Jody's been in there for a while and has gone absolutely through it with the Liberal government, and all she was trying to do was her job, and to stay honest and true in herself and in what her responsibility and her role was. And she got put through the ringer for it. She got she went through weeks or months of lawyers and trying to figure out what she could or couldn't say in public. Like, I couldn't imagine being put in a position like that, where you're the first Indigenous Minister of Justice, and it it ends out the way it did. And man, power to her. Like, she ran as an independent and won. Like, when that came out, I was like, oh, look at look at JWR. Like, go Jody. Like, good for her, because this institution just and it I guess, yeah, there is some hope and progress, because when I look back at my term and I think about being in that building, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't like being there. But the 30 minutes I did feel like, damn, this is my space, was that Jody Wilson-Raybould's swearing-in ceremony, where it was just filled with Indigenous people and all regalia, and it didn't at all feel like you were in the House of Commons. And I forgot I was in the House of Commons, and I just felt like, wow, this is what it feels like to sit around like Indigenous royalty. Like, this is the feeling of I belong here. And after the speech, Jody reached out and she was like, we can make space. We can belong here. And like, she's shown that. And although I have a certain perspective and feeling about my term and the House of Commons and the institution itself, I think that, and I hope that people are encouraged by seeing that, oh, somebody thought that they couldn't make space or couldn't have space for themselves and still were able to accomplish big things and start big things, start conversations. If I actually want to do that, maybe I will actually try and pursue that, because I would never set out to be a politician. I was asked to be. And so I think there's hope in seeing a change of some sort.
I thought you brought up my next question is, I know that it was never really your intention to be in your position. And like you said, you got asked to be a politician. And so what was that experience like for you? Like, what were you doing before being an MP, and how was that transition?
A lot of the work I've done before was always about helping other people, particularly in employment and human resource management. I've done a number of other things since I graduated in 2011, and I've been coaching and taking players out on tournaments since I was 17, and a lot of volunteering and those kinds of all different kinds of anything I could sign up for that was going to get me out of town. Basically, I was attempting to get on that. And I had moved back to the territory, back to Iqaluit from Ottawa, actually, and was taking business admin, human resource management, when the college strike happened, and decided to move back up. And worked in suicide prevention in the Quality of Life Secretariat with the government of Nunavut, and lost a friend to suicide, and kind of found myself wondering what I was doing in that position, and left. And then found myself with Nunavut Dungavik Incorporated, or the Territorial Inuit Advocacy Organization. And in that, I was an Inuit employment officer. So a part of the Nunavut Agreement, Article 23, talks specifically to Inuit employment. So that was basically my baby, trying to ensure and uphold different levels of federal, territorial, and municipal governments to have that equal representation level of Inuit within the workforce that you see within their wherever they are. So Nunavut is 84-85% Inuk. So that's the level of Inuit representation we should see in the workforce in these different levels of governance. And I was barely there 2 months, I think, and had just received a message from a friend who I didn't realize was a part of the Nunavut NDP Electoral District Association. And he said he wanted to have a conversation about politics. And I was like, you're asking the wrong person. If you want an opinion about Trudeau, like, no, thank you. I got no time to talk about that, man. I got nothing. You're talking to the wrong person about politics. And he was like, no, it's not about Trudeau or the Liberals, but if you don't want that discussion, like, I don't want to pressure you. I don't want to put that on you. And I was like, well, let's see what he has to say. Like, it doesn't hurt to have a discussion. And so I think it was a Saturday or Sunday morning, and he came over and he was like, so I'm a part of this group. And I was like, oh dear, where is this going? And he was like, at the end of the conversation, I said, okay, just so we're clear, you're asking me if I'd be interested in running for the New Democrat Party for Member of Parliament for Nunavut. He goes, yes. And I was like, okay. Let me think about that one. I used a little bit more colorful language before, and then had done my research on jug meat. That was my number one thing. I couldn't run for a leader I didn't believe in. So I did really, really heavy research on jug meat, who has had his own barriers he's had to overcome in his life that are very similar to a lot of things that Indigenous people experience all the time too. And he wears a turban. He's visually a minority. He's visually racialized, and those kinds of things. I would assume he has had to go through things in life and figure out how to navigate it. And of course, I couldn't run for someone I didn't feel I could have a normal human conversation with. And so after doing research on that and figuring I can put that trust in him, having a conversation with my mom, who was kind of like, do you want me to jump up and down like you do crazy things all the time? We support you. We love you no matter what. So you're going to do what you want regardless of what I say. So you should just, like, what do you have to lose? You should just go for it. Why not? And I really didn't. I don't have kids. I don't have a mortgage or anything like that. Very much student style living, if you will, and being only in whatever my mid-20s at the time. There was really nothing I could afford to not work for 6 weeks, and there was nothing else for me to lose. And so I said, sure, like, why not at least shake something up? I mean, the ultimate goal is, of course, to get elected, but if I'm not going to get there, at least I can have the other candidates give them a run for that spot.
And yeah, that was one of the questions that actually came in is, would you have any advice for Indigenous women or Inuit women who are wanting to get into politics or run for the House of Commons?
Yep, I think the most important part is finding your foundation of support, finding people that will treat you like you at the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month, whatever, when you need that recharge. That's something that I didn't do. And I think a lot of Indigenous people, we're not good at stopping and taking care of ourselves. We're so concerned about people around us all the time and how do we help each other in community, that I think a lot of the time we fail to stop and reflect and say, how am I doing? And that definitely was something that I struggled with. I mean, I was very public about my 2-month mental health leave after that burnout. And that was working way too much and not turning to that support, not turning to a space where I was Mumilaaq, just Mumilaaq, and not Mumilaaq the MP. And so day in, day out was just Mumilaaq the MP, Mumilaaq the MP, and it exhausted me. And that's the number one thing I would suggest. And people ask, like, if I'm second guessing myself, should I even And I'm like, yes, second guess yourself, triple guess yourself, quadruple guess yourself. And if you're still feeling like this is something that you want to do, then do it. But it's okay to completely question yourself. I wish I did, because then I would have realized the kind of ideations I'm walking into when I'm walking into this building, and I might have been a little bit more prepped. I don't think there's anything wrong in those kinds of things, but ultimately finding that support and finding your group, finding your people, understanding and being okay with that, like not being the same people you thought it might be.
Yeah.
Becoming a public figure, like, can really change relationships and really change how people view you, how people want to interact with you. Don't be discouraged by the fact that you in your mind think your support is going to look a certain way, and that might fall through. Like, that's fine. You just got to go
Yeah.
and find support elsewhere. I've definitely been put in positions where I never thought I would see or hear something come out of someone's mouth who I thought I could trust so much. And that's how life goes sometimes. It doesn't matter if I'm in this position or like, regardless. But it's finding that support and being okay with like having to go and find it too.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think, yeah, your system starts changing around you when you yourself are changing and evolving. And I think some people get kind of attached to like a preconceived idea or a story of who you may be. And then you're like, no, this is like who I was 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 2 months ago, but this doesn't align with me anymore. And so I think as Indigenous people, like we're so used to adapting to the world around us, but also coming back to our community and coming back to kinship and coming back to relationship. And so I'm curious to know, because you have given like a lot of speeches and you have like definitely probably challenged people's perceptions and also like won people's hearts over. And so I'm curious to know, like, what is your what does it look like behind the scenes, like before you're giving a speech? Like, what do you have to set up yourself to feel comfortable giving that speech? Do you have any rituals or routines? What does that look like for you?
I feel like I'm at my counseling session.
I'm curious to know.
I was just talking to her, and I'm very open about this stuff too, because I have trauma-informed counseling, and my counselor is great and really helps me reflect. And I've noticed as time goes on, and the more publicity or public awareness I get, the longer it takes me to work myself into a good headspace and then decompress after something. And I can complain. It's the social media world, though. I don't live that world.
Right.
I don't live in a world where I used to, and that very much contributed to the burnout as well. Before I had staff where I could put all that stuff onto their plate. The words are mine, but I'm not posting them. I'm not engaging with the content or the comments, or I try not to. And there could be a post where there are absolutely no negative things, but to me, it's an immense amount of pressure to continue to do more, to stay in that role, to stay like do as absolute much as I can, even though I'm one human in one position. And if I had the support of an organized community, if you will, like, those things happen. I mean, you see support from my party, you see support from other organizations, but it's a really lonely space to wake up and think about, okay, how am I going to try and get this message through to a national or international level, and to be thinking at that height all the time. But to kind of turn around at the end of the day, and it's a really lonely job. With that kind of like, people change their kind of perception of me. And so the press conference, for example, that was a good probably 12 hours of just mentally prepping, and I didn't sleep well that night. It was very overwhelming almost. I was very much working myself into a headspace of, you're going to be talking about a man who raped many Inuit children, and these children are now elders. Some have passed away, and they have been calling on having something done for years. I've gotten messages since shortly after being elected. That question came up specifically about Revoir during campaign. How are you going to, if you are selected, bring him back from France so that he can face justice? And so here I am almost 2 years later actually doing that. But that's how long some things can take to work up to get up to that national spot. But people have been asking for these things for a long time. People have passed away and never seen that justice, even though they were one of the first people to publicly come out about how this man sexually assaulted them, and starting these trickle effects that need to happen, but also never seeing those wounds heal before they're actually gone. So I'm like, I'm here kind of gearing myself up, thinking about all these kinds of things for a good chunk of time. And I find the longer I stay in this position, the longer it takes me to prep. And then the press conference is great. I had so much fun with Charlie. Like we rocked it. And but then after that, that weekend, it took me a whole weekend to I felt very depressed after, especially with the continuation of the graves being found, and people people know the numbers 215, 751, and that's it. People are kind of like already done with that conversation. We're like, we've just started it. Like, we've just started finding kids. What do you mean it's not a thing to be discussed anymore? So that, and then, like, even though I'm in those difficult spaces, in the end, it's always, you gotta decide to just do it. Get up and do it. Like, you gotta just go. Like, it's up to me in my brain to just figure it out. And there is, of course, I think, external things that always help. But at the end of the day, I understand, like, I gotta exercise. I gotta eat as best as I can. I gotta take time off work. Like, it's my responsibility to take care of myself. And that's always what it comes to. But it takes sometimes a bit to get there now.
Yeah, well, and we put so much pressure on Indigenous women, Inuit women. We put so much pressure on our women, and we put them on these pedestals almost. And like, if we're not allowed to fail the same way as like a non-Indigenous person is allowed to fail, like if we make a mistake, we're going to be like, we'll have to own up to that mistake, which is fine. It's all about accountability. But people don't recognize, like, when you are giving a speech, you are in direct relation to that community. You are in direct relation to that trauma. You're in direct relationship to those experiences. And so it's not just a speech like, I don't know, probably other people in Parliament give with like no emotional attachment. It's like you are actually bringing in like the past to the present and hoping for a better future. And so is justice something that can be done within the federal institution in regards to having these priests held accountable? And why do you think that it hasn't happened yet?
Money. I think honestly a lot of it is it would cost a lot. Could you imagine if the federal government had to, and they should, like, this is so weird to say, but if they had to provide basic human rights and justice, like if they absolutely had to, that would cost them billions. Like, I couldn't even put a number on, probably trillions of dollars, if they were going to ensure every community that was majority Indigenous had clean drinking water, had affordable living. Like, to make Nunavut accessible and livable for the people there would cost so much money. And I think that's a huge factor. We saw it in as early as the 1960s, where in the 1920s, when TB was down in southern parts of Canada, spreading like wildfire, and First Nations and Métis individuals were filling up hospital beds and hotel rooms, and had either passed or had gotten better in the 1960s. Those hotel beds, hospital beds, sanatoriums. People didn't want to see those jobs lost. So instead of moving the health services up north, the Canadian federal institution decommissioned 2 hospitals in Nunavut so that Inuit were forced to come down south so that those employees can keep their jobs. Those hospital beds, those sanatoriums and hotels can stay staffed up. And those people can keep making their money down south. Inuit have always been an economic chip, continue to be. I had a friend come down who needed an MRI on their knee. You can't get an MRI in Nunavut, have to come down here. Well, that one seat on the flight, that hotel bed, that hospital bed, how many employees are behind each and every one of those things? And how many of those are not making money that come into Nunavut? But this individual is in Nunavut. So like all the time we're seeing different ways things play out so that Indigenous people just have no shot, no chance. How are we supposed to? I mean, like, look at the things you and I have done. We've felt we've had to leave home to do them. I mean, I couldn't go and take human resource management even if I wanted to in the territory. Like, there's no way to do it. And even if, the online option, yeah, right. If there's a blizzard, if it's too foggy, you think I'm going to be connecting to the internet in Nunavut?
Yeah.
No way. Like, don't even get me started on that. So I think there's a lot of things that people just, they look and they have one particular view and don't really see all the other things that go on to get there and even go on at the time.
Yeah, and I think it's like lack of I've never been to Nunavut. So like I think for me, even I still have a lot to learn about Inuit people and Inuit communities. And I have no idea what each one of you have experienced because I've never experienced it or I've never had a connection to the land over there. And so what would you want listeners to know about, Nunavut or Inuit people or your community that they may not know already?
Inuit are such sharing people. Oh my goodness. If someone tells you to eat, you better be getting ready to sit down and eat because that's the only answer there is when you walk into a home. And I think there's quite a few different, what I call norms. I think one of the biggest glaring ones is that we don't have trees. So we kind of, or I refer it to as a snow globe. It feels like you can see for such a long period of time. Whereas down south, you don't have that same feeling, you kind of feel more enclosed. And that can be very different. That can very much change your perspective on everything. And I think people don't realize that. But I guess in terms of like what I want people to know, there's a lot of people in the north that are in difficult situations because the federal institution has forced their families into those situations. And a lot of the time, we don't even realize that we're in it. I was laughing with my best friend the other day, watching a documentary about happiness and about how dopamine, when it gets released, it's like this kind of natural high. And I looked at him and I was like, no wonder why we could make it through high school. Like, we were running from practice to practice to practice. I was on the ice 7 days a week in grade 11 and 12. And that was constantly almost like, I think, running to the next high. Like, we were always in sports and we could survive all the craziness going on around us because we had that ability. My hometown is one that has a higher rate of suicide. And what I usually talk about is when younger men stop sports. And that really just kind of confirmed for me, like, we go through, high school where you might be on the court or on the ice or whatever 5-7 days a week. And then all of a sudden you're not on it whatsoever. and that dopamine is no longer being released. You're no longer having this natural high going on. But that, we see those certain patterns, certain spikes, and although people are in a lot of turmoil and sometimes quite often don't realize it, I really didn't. Although I had a safe home, there was a lot going on around me, and I really didn't realize it until I was like 22 or 23, just how crazy it was for all of us, and all the things going on. So there's that intergenerational trauma, I think, is extremely present, but people aren't necessarily super aware, and I think that's okay. Sometimes it can be more difficult to be aware of what you're in when you're in it.
Yeah.
But I think that Inuit are such caring and giving people, love to share, like just ask questions, and oh my goodness, Inuit just love to share and want to show you everything, about how we eat, what we dress, how we sew, it's just, I guess, getting the conversation started like we are here.
Yeah, exactly. I think you touched on a few really good points there. And I have to, I relate so much because you don't even recognize how maybe dysfunctional your world is growing up until you leave home, and then you experience and see and witness other people's lives. And you're like, oh, wait, my life was nothing like this. And yeah, and we also lack, for me, I didn't even know what options were available because all I had known was what I grew up in, and that was usually around survival instincts and just, getting by. But I feel like now we're in a time of I want to say I'm hopeful for the future because I also see Indigenous, Inuit, Métis people all reclaiming their culture, their language, their protocols, and also being in direct relation, like you said, speaking to one another. And so I'm curious to know, when you are feeling lethargic or overwhelmed, or like you said, when you're feeling burnt out, what are the practices? What keeps you sane and in your power?
I think there's a number of tools I've been trying to develop. When you brought up June, yeah, the whole uncovering of those graves really, I even knew the press release was coming out, and I was crying before I was even listening to it. Just a very daunting, ugly feeling of what Canada was finally realizing, or that's what it felt like. But I try and do beading. So I get my puppy very soon. I'm super excited. And I eventually want to have beaded collars for her. And it's an extremely great way for me in particular to practice my patience. So that's something that I've been really trying to work on this summer, and just really trying to find that more settle down and take a moment, take a breather. I have my fish, I have my cat. I really enjoy my gardening, and even weeding is kind of not numbing, but it's a repetitive task that you can kind of not necessarily think too hard about. And I enjoy those kinds of things, and just trying to be more structured. I mean, we give kids playtime, bedtime, on all those kinds of stuff, and they thrive off structure. And I believe I would thrive off structure as well. So I'm working on developing more of a, do groceries on a certain day, do laundry on a certain day type thing, instead of just kind of willy-nilly shooting the whatever at life and hoping it works out. So definitely trying to create more structure in my life, and a lot more balance, a lot more calmness is something I'm really working on too.
Well, and that was one of the most asked questions. It's what do you hope for after coming out of your position in Parliament when there's another election? What are your plans for the future?
I hope we get to see the seat stay orange. Because, I mean, regardless of who that is, at least that that's a party that can have the ability to speak truth and reality. So I hope the seat stays orange, and look forward to supporting who that may be. But I really don't know what's next. I have a whole bunch of ideas. I'm talking to a drag queen right now about doing a video, and would love to find grant money for that and be able to show that kind of that unity and that allyship with the LGBTQ plus community. And I really, well, as you know, and maybe some of your viewers saw, we were out in Victoria, and I got put in drag for the first time, and I can't tell you what that did to me. Oh my gosh, it's so amazing. I had so much fun with Mackenzie. So we've been kind of chatting, and but there are also so many other things that make me excited. The law program out in at UVic sounds like a space that is very much in the works of being indigenized and having that less of a Western societal feeling of post-secondary. So maybe that's something to look into. I'd love to have a YouTube channel and just take a little bit of time and figure out my stuff. I'd love to learn sign language and work with the deaf community. I'd love to work with youth. Like, there's so many things that
so many avenues.
Yeah, there's so many things I could get so excited about. Ultimately, I'd love to find funding to do a YouTube channel for 12 months or so, and then be able to, in that time, alongside of that, figure out what I want to do next. And I hope that people can see that whatever they give me, I can take and turn into something crazy great. I mean, I was not intending on running for an MP, and look at what I've done. So I'm just really excited to take a bit of time and hopefully figure out what those next big steps are. I really don't know, though, what they are.
Yeah, well, I think like you already did the first step of like choosing what's best for you and like how you want to live your life. Because like you're saying, you were kind of just forced into these positions. And so taking back your power and deciding like what's best for your autonomy and what's best for your life. And you touched on allyship a few times just now. And so I'm curious to know, like, what would be your advice for non-Indigenous followers out there to support Indigenous communities and to be allies towards us?
There's so much documentation out there. Stop asking us what you can do to be of support, because it's out there. Go read the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Pick one and do it. do that. There's all this documentation out there. Stop immediately going to Indigenous people and expecting us to share us with you. Like there's some sort of entitlement to, oh, we're learning about Indigenous people, so Shayla, tell me about your whole life and educate me about everything. That's not how it works. There is a thing called Google, TikTok, Facebook.
True.
There's all these documentations out there. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that's an extremely easy place to start. I specifically talk about the Qihitani Truth Commission, which is kind of the Baffin region, kind of specific, similar to the TRC. There are documents out there that have calls to action already. Go and find those calls to action and learn how to do them. Stop immediately asking Indigenous people. I mean, we're here for questions, but there are some things like I can't, like, people are like, how much is a flight from da-da-da? And I'm like, use Google. What am I, like, a search for? Like, stop. I'm not going to answer that. Like, there's certain things to go and figure out yourself, and show up and get your other white friends to show up.
Yeah, well, speaking of showing up, how can people support this petition that you're currently advocating for to have an independent prosecutor? Is it just signing? Is it emailing? How can people support?
Yes, so if you go to any of our social media pages, specifically, I know it's in Instagram. I'm sure it's in all of them, but there's a link in that bio for sure. And it will take you to a page that opens up with me and Charlie's face on it. And it explains that we're calling on Attorney General David Lametti to investigate crimes against Indigenous peoples carried out through the residential quote unquote school system. So when you open that up, it just asks for a little bit of information, and then it has a pre-typed email already in there with the 4 specific calls to action that talk to that appointment of a fully funded special prosecutor to investigate the historic crimes and cover-ups of abuse committed against Indigenous people in Canada. And it goes into a little bit more detail there, and you just fill out a bit of information, click a button. It does not take that long at all. That button then shoots off an email to David Lametti's office. Then there is 100% the power to ensure that this can be done. David Lametti's office pushing this off onto the RCMP, that's not true. They have the power to ensure that this appointment can be made. So when we're hearing that they can't do anything about it, that's a lie. So right now we're just almost at 16,000. We're hoping to get up to 17,000, and always more the merrier. And looking at the next steps of how we can amp this up.
Sweet. Yeah. Make sure you do everything that Mumilaaq just said. And you did touch on the next steps. And so I'm just curious to know, like, how would you define Indigenous futurism or Inuit futurism? If you could reimagine a future built for us, what would that look like?
So beautiful. I have wondered that, and then I picture like an interesting, probably weird to some people, mishmash of like Avatar / Star Wars, when they're like meeting in the big room and they are all sitting in their little pod, and they all like come from different parts of the huge galaxy, and they all have their discussions. Or like in Lilo and Stitch, when the big thing in the galaxy. So I picture something like that with a like Avatar twist, where we fully understand that we are one with the system. Where we have, like, could you imagine like water turbines that produce electricity that somehow can still work next to whales, still work next to migration routes, still like, so like this kind of like cohabitation, the ability to exist without being inferior to the rest of the ecosystem, and having it kind of like that's, I picture kind of like a Avatar / Star Wars feel. And I say Star Wars because we all need to come together and communicate. And I don't see that happening in a way. I mean, the House of Commons kind of is like that, but it's definitely not a space that's made for everyone. Whereas something like Star Wars, it's a space for all species that are a part of the galaxy. And I like to think that our world can actually look something like that. And I often think and wonder, if we could take every floor level surface in the world and lie it flat, how many times would we cover the earth over and over again? How greedy are humans to just constantly pile on, when we need to be one with this world? Like we're so royally messing it up. And it's phenomenal how if you take out any animal, the system would break. If you take out humans, the system would flourish. And that's just like how much we like need to change our perspective of how we interact with the world. And there's no way the federal institution could ever get there. But to me, that's what imagine Inuit being able to still drive snowmobiles and Hondas and whatever for hunting, but those things are powered by solar or by wind or with a green energy, and be able to train Inuit to make homes, so that Inuit know how to make structures and are now building homes in a way that they see fit. I don't think we would see your standard home look. You can't have that in the north. It's not sustainable. And people just don't have the skills, don't have the availability to that right to opportunity. And I think if we gave that, we would see much more unity, not just with ourselves, but with the earth
as
as
well. Yeah, it's coming back to relations and coming back to looking at each other as like equals. There's no hierarchy within the systems. It just kind of is. And so when we look at our relations, oftentimes we are looking at matriarchy and the matriarchs. And so I'm curious to know, how would you define matriarchy, and are there matriarchs you are currently inspired by?
That's a good question. I had my forehead tattoos done a few weeks ago, and that was one of our big conversations. Was we need a Inuktitut word for matriarch, and there are, like, of course, one for woman, but one specifically for that meaning. And I think there's a number of women in the territory that are, and across Canada, that are really making moves. And I mean, like, look at Mary Simon, just got announced Governor General, and she's Inuk from Inuit ᖃᖅկα�, and she's been involved in politics for a number of years. She was schooling Pierre Trudeau back in the day. And here she is as
oh my gosh.
Like, that's
full circle.
That's awesome. And those kinds of amazing things are happening. People like me are coming in and creating influence. People like you. I don't think when we were growing up, we had people like us to look up to. I think in particular the film and art industry, people like Lakaluk William Bathory, people like Stacey McDonald, that are doing some really, really amazing, cool things and creating that visibility in those circles and beyond. And that's very much led by women, and it's really, really empowering. And you can see within the territory, the pieces of like healing and community involvement and engagement, oftentimes those are led by women. When you look at it and look at who sparked the idea or started the idea, usually it was some ladies sitting around and some aunties figuring stuff out. So I think that we need to figure out an Inuktitut word for it, but there are so many matriarchs.
Well, there's so much to look forward to. I feel like you're saying, there's so many of us doing great work. And again, there wasn't really these role models or people that we had to look up to when we were younger. But I feel like that's shifting, and people, non-Indigenous people, are now waking up to the realities of like how cool and how much they have to learn from each and every one of us. And so how can listeners support your work moving forward? If they can follow you, how can they support you?
Yeah, so social media, of course, is always a great tool to find information and stay in touch. So following on those platforms is always the easiest way. And then, of course, there's the Parliament contact and that email. And my thing is always stay tuned, stay with me, stay updated. So we just recently did a press conference with Charlie Angus and working on next steps and just encouraging that messaging and having more Canadians understand what we are calling for, and asking Canadians to also help us with calling out for it. So people can definitely help by signing that petition. And I did a live yesterday, and I said I challenge everybody to call out 5 friends to do that as well. So it's great that people want to do their part, but I would ask them to take it a step up and have them encourage other people to do their part as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's about creating the ripple effect. Thank you so much, Mumilaaq, for sharing your story, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. Make sure you follow her on Instagram, Twitter, social media. Make sure you do the calls to action. Thank you so much. If you just have any last words. Hi.
Matna, thank you so much for having me, Shayla, and this space and opportunity for discussion. And I'm sure this is one of many.
Oh, yeah. This is the first.
There's so much I really kind of not had to bite my tongue by any means, but like had to kind of stop myself and like, let's not go down that rabbit hole because they can like talk for hours about that one specific thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm super excited for continuing the conversation and having people see more about what it's like to watch two matriarchs work together.
Yeah, this is just the beginning. This is just the first episode out of several. So if you have any questions, just know that you can ask me. You can also ask Mumilaaq. Thank you for joining. Have a blessed day, y'all. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at Matriarch.Movement. And don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.